restrictions in the formal sector that create unemployment. We're going to have a city where we also have an informal sector. We're going to see how formal and informal workers locate in the city, and we're going to see what happens to the structure of the city once we change transportation variables. That's the first model. The second model is a linear urban model, very simple, but that considers two different modes of transportation, public transport and cars. And we're going to see that once we consider the role of cars, the theoretical predictions of what happens when you increase access on the quality of employment of local areas changes radically. So I'm going to offer you those two perspectives. Obviously then, that leads us to the empirical question. And that's why we have our case study of Sao Paulo. For that, I'm going to present you the data we use and how we're going to define our main variable, informal employment. I'm going to discuss a little bit the urban transport investment that occurred between 2000 and 2010. There's going to be a source of correlation for the treatment. And I'm going to show some interesting maps about the spatial patterns of distribution of informal employment in Sao Paulo and how that has changed in that period 2000-2010. And I think those maps in itself are a good contribution to the existing literature for Brazil and Sao Paulo, because I haven't seen many works actually plotting how informality looks like in space. And it's going to be, I think, a big shock for you as it was for me to see how these patterns have actually changed in the city. So maybe you can help me out with the interpretation or maybe some references here, because I find it interesting that we are the first one to identify that pattern. Maybe there are some other works out there that have found something similar. In the next part of the presentation, we're going to discuss the empirical analysis. So the task that we have here is identifying some causal effect of transport access changes on employment quality, which of course is very difficult, as you can imagine. We are facing all kinds of econometric problems. It's not like the perfect setting of experimental where you can control from randomization and you have everything. Well, you can control for a lot of things in the setup. But here we just observe the changes, and then we have to deal with all the problems that come with trying to identify these causal effects. So I'm not going to put a lot of emphasis in the interpretation of the results as causal effects, because as you're going to see, that depends a lot on the empirical strategy that we end up using. But it's a good exercise anyway to discuss those issues, to see how difficult it is to evaluate the impact of transport exposed. Finally, I'm going to present you with the results that's just coming out of the oven, so results that we actually found this week. The last regressions we ran, I think, were yesterday. Very preliminary results, but it's what we have so far in there. Also, I'm going to be grateful for any kind of input you might have, how we can improve this. Bon. So first, for the motivation of this work. I think, as Avelino said, this is a topic of prime importance for people living in this city. It's so obvious that I don't know if I need to spend any time talking about how important public transport is for a city. The problems you're facing of congestion, overcrowding, underprovision, etc., speak for themselves. But okay, in Sao Paulo you have these trends that have been identified by many urban analysts, such as the peripheralization of the poor, meaning that the poor have been continually pushed away from central areas where you have access to services, access to jobs, continuously, because land prices are rising so fast. Many people are expelled from these areas with good access, so they go and live in the periphery. So it's together with this process of gentrification, when richer people take over areas that were before poor. So in this context, we have a problem because people that are living in the periphery are at a disadvantage because they don't have transport access, so they cannot access those job creation centers in the city, and this can mean that the place where you live can determine your job outcomes. So people that are in the periphery with bad access may have bad job outcomes because of this distance. So this is all part of the spatial mismatch hypothesis. It says if you have people living in one place or jobs being created in another place, there is a mismatch between these two things. Therefore, its residential location is to blame for bad job outcomes. And that whole literature comes from the case of African Americans in the United States. As you may have heard, the story there is that they end up living in the center, what used to be the old center. They took over that central areas, the poor live in the CBD, Central Business District, and all the rich move to the suburbs where they can enjoy bigger plots of lands, etc. And then you have that job creation in the United States is mainly suburban, so jobs are created outside the city center, and therefore the African Americans are very far from those jobs. Here we don't have that case, of course, because the poor do not majority live in centers, but we still have the problem that, for instance, social housing sometimes is placed very far from job creation centers, case of Leste area here in Sao Paulo. And furthermore, the areas that are newly urbanized by informal occupation, also people are kind of stuck in those areas, and those are very far from jobs. So if those problems are relevant, then policymakers have basically three alternatives. These are currently being discussed here too. So you can either bring people closer to jobs, meaning, for instance, that you build social housing in areas close to where there is employment creation, something that is being discussed here, is a good alternative or not. That way you also reduce social segregation. You can bring jobs closer to people, so you mean, for instance, here the process of job creation is very centralized. What if we create industrial parks, etc., in different parts of the city that are closer to where actually the poor live? And the third way of tackling this problem is through transportation policies. So what if we bring the city to the people through the network of transport? In that way you can consider subsidies, for instance, to particular groups like the poor, or you can consider building new infrastructure. So it is in this particular case of new infrastructure that we are going to focus on. So for all of the solutions, we're going to see how this building new infrastructure actually helps with the problem of bad job outcomes being explained by the distance to central areas. So here we have, on that importance of transport infrastructure and employment, we have a quote from the World Bank. On the World Planning Line 4, the World Bank played a big role on financing and pushing for the construction of this Line 4. You may remember when the debate was happening. And there they say that this is of strategic importance, so you must build it, because we're going to promote the support, social and urban inclusion of groups who are in prison in areas farthest from job center and are condemned to a social and spatial exclusion. So very, very dramatic, very emotional way of selling a transportation project, right? And this also had a, well, of course, the result was that they did build Line 4. It was very influential, this perspective of we must connect the poor because we are indebted to them, etc., etc. So now Line 4 was constructed in review analysis, so this is one of the cases that we will be analyzing. Was it true that building Line 4 helped those people living in those areas? So if this is true and what we have been discussing before is true, then you can expect that in the areas around Line 4, job quality of the residents of those areas improved much more than in other areas where infrastructure was not built, right? So this is the kind of analysis that we're going to be doing. The question therefore is, does improving access to public transportation indeed improve job outcomes around access points? So we're talking jobs are created in an area, but how is the job status of people that live around areas with public transport, right? Particularly job status, I mean that we're going to be talking about a measure of local job quality. For job quality, I'm going to use a measure of the informality rate. So we're going to have the higher quality jobs are formal jobs, because the formal jobs have social security provisions, more stability, etc., etc. Informal jobs, on the other hand, are more unstable and people do not have secure social security.
Self-employer is informal, or?
I'll be showing you the definition. Self-employed that do not, that's on the precise definition, self-employed that do not contribute to social security, so previdencia social. Those are considered informal. The ones that do contribute are formal. Okay, so that's for the motivation. Now for the theoretical predictions. We have first a case of this model that is going to show that once you improve transportation access, informality rates should drop. So I'm going to explain very fast. This is a paper that I developed with my co-author Posada that we can also make public as a working paper here. It's a finished paper. So this one will be accessible to YouTube very soon because I think it's finished. So basically we're going to have a linear city. It's going to have a unique center where all employment, formal employment locates. And we're going to have two types of workers, formal and informal. We have formal that are employed and formal that are unemployed. Why? Because these are people that actively seek for formal jobs but may end up in a period in unemployment. Why? Because there are frictions in the formal sector. A la vis-a-vis, so a basic labor market model. We're going to have the big difference between formal and informal workers here is that they have different commuting patterns. So on the one hand we have formal workers that put on a tie every day, try to work, every day to the office. So we're going to say that the commuting frequency of formal workers is higher than that of formal workers. Why? Because formal workers have the choice to work from home, meaning that they can do some of their occupations at their own home. They have a small workshop, etc., or they can stay in the neighborhood. So conduct their productive activity in the neighborhood. They don't actually have to go to an office every day, to a place of work. They are more free to decide where to work. So we're going to have those two groups that have those two different commuting patterns. And we're going to assume that the wage is lower in the informal sector. That's empirically demonstrated. But also you earn less in the informal sector, but there are some intrinsic benefits to being informal, meaning that you can receive social insurance transfer from the government. For instance, you can have your healthcare subsidized. Whereas if you're a formal worker, I don't know how it's here, but you have to contribute a part of your salary to pay for your social security, is it like that?
Pay for social security for public health now?
Yeah.
No, you go to the private sector.
Or we go to the
Yeah.
private sector?
Yeah, that's the private sector.
For health. Private health.
So we're going to see how with this setup, it's much more complex than this, but yeah, I'm giving you the right version. The resulting, maybe this is more telling, something like this. This is a city, so here we have the central business district. We're going to see all the employments are here. You can think of this as the extended center, the center in Sao Paulo. We're going to have a segmented city, so we have a city that has two different zones. One is the formal zone, here, where all the formal and unemployed workers, formal and unemployed, reside. And we're going to have an informal area where all the informal workers reside. So here, this is optimal, so there is no center every day to an office or whatever, you can stay at home. It might be optimal for you to live here, pay lower rents, and conduct some of your occupations at home. So all of these are optimal solutions for these areas. So obviously the city is more expensive for formal workers. Why? Because they have to pay higher commuting costs, they have to incur in commuting costs every day they have to pay to get to their offices, and because they have to bear higher rents. They want to live in the city, so the formal city is more expensive than the informal city. So there is a gap between the urban cost of formal and informal workers. Anything that makes this gap higher, so anything that makes the city more expensive, so for instance, higher commuting costs means that there will be lower formal job creation. I'm going to show you why. But before I show you that, notice here, for instance, what happens if there is an increase in the amount of formal workers. So say a lot of, like what happens in Sao Paulo, we're going to discuss that in a minute. But here, if you suddenly had that a lot of the informal became formal, obviously this section of the city will expand, but you will see there also that the rents that every single formal worker pays for being close to the center gets higher. So,
And I can understand that if commuting costs are higher for the informal workers because they commute less. That's your argument in the previous slide. But the rent gradient is based on the commuting cost to go from where you live to the CBD.
yeah,
So I don't see how you can get a different slope in the rent curve.
the commuting frequency is different. So they face the same commuting cost, but the commuting frequency, this one is supposed to be 1, they commute every day, this one is supposed to be lower than 1.
Well, I have to read the
Yeah,
paper
that's
proposal because I don't know how you put it into the model, into the typical
It's a bit
linear city model.
Yeah. So the city, the formal city expands, so you see that the formal take over more part of the city and they all pay higher rents, which is something along the lines of what happened here in Sao Paulo. So I was saying that anything that makes the city more expensive for formal workers means lower formal job creation. Why? Because if a formal firm wants to attract a worker, they have to compensate for the outside options that the worker has.
So those workers there, they have the same preference over
Yeah.
labor and leisure. So and then so I'm a little bit confused. I think it's serious. So if rents adjust, why do you get this difference in slopes? I mean, if workers are the same in terms of preference, right? And those prices are, I think, are a general equilibrium result, right?
Yes.
Right? So what is given is commuting cost, right? That's given.
Yes.
But rents are not given, right? They
No,
should.
those are equilibrium. So they'll change endogenously every period
Yeah.
with what happens in the labor market. So we have basically, that is all the workers.
What is the friction? There should be some friction here that you don't get the result.
The
Yeah,
commuting
why?
frequency is lower for formal employee.
But that's endogenously.
No, it's exogenous. So I'm assuming this one is 1 for them and lower than 1 for them.
For both employee and unemployed. One.
No, yes, but this is because these people are not,
You force this attraction
yeah,
exogenous.
yeah.
Alright.
These are not our employees. You can think of it as transitional unemployed, like formal that are seeking for jobs,
Seeking for
want
job,
a
they
formal
usually
job,
commute same way.
and they commute every day to find jobs.
So dynamically they should be expelled to the other side of this.
They may become informal, but they are not seeking actively for employment. So out of this pool, sometimes they can be expelled.
So the wage
What?
difference will compensate for that. If you want to work informally, you don't
Yes.
have to commute to the CBD,
Exactly.
but your wages are lower,
Exactly.
then you get the journey.
Yes. We have in the model that in the working paper we have an extension where people can earn an informal income that is higher in the center than in the periphery. And then we let them endogenously decide what to do. And we get something similar. So that's another way of getting it. So formal firms have to offer a wage that is high enough so that it's attractive to work in the formal sector, of course. That means that the option of informal is not attractive anymore. That means that they should compensate for the lower community costs that informal workers have, and for the intrinsic benefits of being informal, of course, like these transfers that you get from the board. So that's why if we improve the connectivity in the city, if transportation costs drop, that means that the urban gap between formal and informal workers becomes lower, meaning that there is more formal job creation. So formal firms that do not have to offer such a high wage anymore, they can create more jobs. When they create more jobs, then the informality rate drops. That is the mechanism. But obviously here we're not assuming that there are different kinds of transportation modes. We're going to assume that everybody, which is not true, of course. This changes also with income and maybe with the status. And we're going to assume that these commuting cost reductions are homogeneous across space, which is also not true. So those are the limitations of this model. But this is more the intuition of how a change in transport infrastructure can result in lower informality rates.
So basically, the result is that if you decrease the commuting costs, so if you open a new metro station, the wages in the center should decrease.
Formal wage that has to be offered in order to attract a
In
worker
the CBD.
be lower.
it's lower. That means that they can create more jobs for the city. This, for instance, can be a reduction in the commuting time, but also, for instance, what happened here in Sao Paulo with the billete único, where you have a decrease in transportation costs because they integrated the urban transport system. So that means for a lot of people, getting access to the network became much cheaper than before. So that effect is also captured there. So for instance, the reduction of the billete único, according to this model, should have a causal effect on the informality rate, like reduce in this model. So now the alternative model. Now we have a different setup here. This is from Leroy and Stier. We have, again, a city where all employment happens at the center, but we're going to have here two transportation modes. We're going to have that people can travel either by car or by public transport. Here we're not going to explicitly model any labor markets. We're going to just model residential choices. We have two groups of people, the rich and the poor. We're also not telling where they come from. Very American model. We just assume that God gave us the rich and the poor and these two modes, and we're going to see how people decide where to live in the city in this setup. Also very American, the rich have a preference for more living space. So if you're a rich person, then in your preferences you value more space. And obviously the rich would value the time more highly, so the income per hour of a rich person is lower than a poor person, of course. And we're going to see that in a model such as this, where people live depends on the cost of cars relative to income. So I'm going to explain that with this graph. Here we have a city. This is one of the cases they discuss. They use this model to explain how the urban structure in the United States has changed as the cost of cars have become lower. So this is somewhere after the 70s, let's say, where the cost of cars dropped so that it became accessible to buy cars for some of the poor. Before we had that, all the rich lived in the periphery because they had cars, so they could be away from the center that was filled with poor people that they don't want to be around. They could be here in these big mansions with the fast cars, going to work every day. But suddenly the car became cheaper. Then some of the people could afford cars. They started populating also the periphery, the suburbs. Here we have, this is the big gradient rent for the poor that commute by car. So we're going to have some of the poor at the end of the city commuting by car. We're going to have here that they're sharing the periphery with some of the rich that also commute by car. This distance here is the breaking point where it makes sense to have a car or not. And that depends on the fixed and variable cost of cars. So how much does it actually cost to buy the car, to maintain it, gasoline, and how much time does it save you compared to using the public transport that is lower.
Is
So-
the break even for poor, right?
It-
For rich is closer to the city.
Yeah, exactly, because the income is higher. So this distance is going to depend on those costs of public transport relative to cars, and also on the income of the two groups. So whenever income increases, for instance, this distance becomes larger. So as income increases, it makes more sense to have cars for more areas of the city. Here we have that some of the poor commute by public transport and live near the center. And here we have that some of the rich actually decided to move back to the center and walk to work, for instance. We have use public transport here. So we're going to have a center that is shared by the rich and the poor, and a periphery that is shared by the rich and the poor. You have some of that here in Sao Paulo. So the proportion of the poor in the very center, you have been to the center. I have been in a field trip we took with Fred, which is very interesting. Once you cross this east line of the poor and the rich in the very center, in the very heart of Sao Paulo, you have something like this. Here, of course, this would be people commuting by helicopter, I don't know. But you have, okay, the rich that want to be close to the center, but there's also some areas of the center that have been taken over by the poor because they want also that access to public transport, right? If they live here, they have prime access to the center and they don't have to buy cars. Some of them will effectively bid for this space in the city. Some of them will be expelled to the periphery and be forced to commute by car, because at this distance it doesn't make sense to commute by public transport. Of course, this will change again depending on how incomes change and how the cost of cars and the effectiveness of public transport changes. So this is just to show that the urban configuration, when we consider two modes, is much more complicated than initially we thought. Some predictions of this mode. So I took some data from the origin destination survey here in Sao Paulo, and I calculated how much time you would save if you drive a car instead of taking the public transport. That gives that you save 22 minutes. The estimate of Glaser for this paper, why do poor live in cities, he obtained something like 23 minutes, so it's very close. You take your car for 5 kilometers, mostly because of the fixed cost of transport costs. So the marginal time per kilometer is not so much different, but you spend a lot of time waiting for the bus, going from A to B at stations, etc. So that eats a lot of time, and that's why a lot of people prefer the car. So under these conditions, it makes sense for a person making $16 an hour to buy a car instead of using public transport. So for instance, if we would double the income from 10 to 20 on average for everybody, we should see that a lot of people are switching from public transport to cars just because of this income effect.
That's the prediction of what model?
Sorry?
The prediction of which model? Not yours.
No, Leroy.
This is Leroy.
It was actually trying to explain because the traditional urban equilibrium model could not explain why in the US the rich live in the periphery and the poor in the center. The only way to explain that would be that the elasticity of space, their preference for space would be larger than the preference for commuting time. So there would be be a relative advantage for them, but with just one mode you cannot explain that. Because when you estimate those elasticities, they are pretty much the same. And so with two modes you can explain. It's not doing a very good job in explaining the comeback to downtown. And even the CBD is not in historic downtown somehow. So the story you're trying to tell us is not very convincing yet.
It's just that.
But you need two modes. You certainly need two modes. Otherwise.
But I mean, the historical center is an area with high connectivity. Let's say. So if location partly is because of this high connectivity.
In your original paper, there is just one mode, with the one with Posadas.
Yes.
You
Yes.
need to add that.
So
you are considering the historic center our business center. That's the case, right?
this is just theoretical, but later I'm going to show you where we identify this. The point is that Glaser tells you this whole story to explain why you can obtain the result that once you improve access, poverty rates around the areas of increased access increase. He tells the case of Harlem in the United States, where new metro stations were built in Harlem. There was a massive flock of African Americans going to those areas looking for that connectivity. They displaced the rich ran away to Connecticut, etc. From those areas, so those areas were taken. So obviously what you would observe is that those areas improved access, but also their poverty rates increased. Because it was especially the poor who could not afford a car who were willing to bid for more connectivity. And this is the fear of some people. Sorry?
There's an history about diferenciados em Higienópolis. I don't know if
Exactly, yeah. I was going to say that that's the fear of those ladies in Moreno-Monroy. Maybe they don't know the work of Glaser, but they have this intuition that, you know.
I'm sure they haven't.
They haven't, I don't think so. But it's from the perspective of the rich is intuitive. So you put,
Very intuition.
right, that's it's a system that connects. So once you connect, you bring in a lot of people that you usually want to repel. If there's this case of segregation by levels of income. Here, the story, yes, not totally convincing because we would be assuming that these poor are able to bet for some areas with centrality here, which is with the very high rents that are now, would be very unlikely at this point. And here also, a model like this assumes that basically there are no amenities in the center, so they did something similar for Paris and London and showed that because Paris and London offer such high amount of amenities, then the rich are not willing to leave the center. This might be the case of Sao Paulo too, where infrastructure, well, hospital, cinemas, etc. are highly localized in the center. So if you move to the suburbs in Sao Paulo, you'll be trading off all those amenities for nothing basically. So also, well, okay. So much for theory. Just to enlighten you about the predictions that we have. Now for our empirical case, we have the case of Sao Paulo. We have data from the census 2000-2010. We use some data from the origin destination survey of 97 into 2007. We're going to work at the microdata level because we're going to determine our informal status by individual. So here, to your question, we say that someone is informal if it's an unregistered employee or if it's a self-employed person or an employer that do not contribute to Social Security. So all these questions are in the center. Are you empregado sin cartera, con cartera? Are you autónomo? Do you pay Providencia Social or not? So from those specific questions we build this, but the core, the bulk of this measure is basically this of the unregistered employee. So sometimes this one is used as a proxy for informal employment here. Here we just add the autonomous employers that do not contribute, and this measure has been used for other works
Have you just in
Brazil.
census, right? You don't have it on the OD.
No, it says.
Yeah. And after we obtain this number of informal employees per area, so we have these weighted spatial areas of the census, there's 633 of them. We have to match those of 2000 and 2010. Great work done by Fred, because sometimes the areas change, of course. So we have to make it like for the 2 years. Now, what happened to all the infrastructure in these 10 years? For the metro, bit disappointing outcome. Only 11.2 kilometers were built in 10 years. But in the 90s, I think none was built. So this is a really big improvement relative to the previous situation of the 90s, where there was no infrastructure provision, basically. We have the 108 kilometers of bus corridors.
Those are for the metropolitan region? Or
Sorry?
those corridors are for the metropolitan or for the city?
This is just it.
Just the city.
Yeah.
We have metropolitan, but we decided not to use it in the end.
Yeah.
So the previous slide was 633 áreas de ponderação are for the city, not for the metropolitan region.
No, for the metropolitan region.
Metropolitan region. We're not going to consider we did consider intermunicipal or not, and it did not change much. What happens is that there is a lot of heterogeneity between the area around 20 kilometers from the center and beyond, because then it's a mix of urban, rural areas that are very big in size with very few population. So that was adding mostly noise to the estimation. So we decided to do both with and without intermunicipal, and decided without intermunicipal was better. It doesn't change much.
So in line 9, you're considering just the part of line 9 that's within the city, within the city.
So infrastructure improved, but surprisingly, or not, average commuting times did not improve. What we have here is probably a reduction in commuting costs, because, for instance, Villete Único made it cheaper to commute by public transport, but there was no improvement in the actual commuting time of people average. Either if they could make trips in collective or individual. So actually in these 10 years, mobility became worse. Ciro can explain why. I'm not going to touch those topics. So here we have the first map we prepared for you. So this is the distribution of the informality rate. So this is the number of informal employees over the total number of employees, which is the sum of formal plus informal, okay, as a rate. So here we have a clear center-periphery pattern, as we expected. We have here clearly the informality rates in 2000 are lower in the centro expandido. As you increase the distance to the center, those informality rates increase. The variation is between 25% on the lowest point to 65% in the highest point in 2000. We have the initial picture for infrastructure. Here we have our metro lines and our train lines and our bus lines. This is what happened in 2000. Now we're going to see what happens between 2000 and 2010. What happens here? The average informality rate was 40%. The average informality rate in 2010 was 29%. So there was a reduction of, on average, of more than 10 percentage points in informality rates. That is a huge change. I don't know how to explain it, because I have worked with the cases of India, of Colombia, of China, and Africa, and I have never seen such a reduction in formality rates. So there was a huge process of formalization of the labor force in these 10 years. More than 10 percentage points. What is interesting, besides the magnitude of the reduction, is the spatial pattern. Here you see the lighter colors represent higher drops. So for instance, there are areas that reduced 50% their informality rates in 10 years. They dropped half. Whereas other areas that are in darker colors in this map did not experience a change or even experience a slight increase.
So I'm a little bit confused. So
Yes.
the very light gray,
Yes.
you don't have information, or I mean, they are
White.
surrounding, for example. What is
No,
that?
we have information for all. So these are areas that experience the highest drops in informality rates. Yeah, this maybe,
The lighter the color,
yeah,
the
there
higher
are no
the,
ones.
usually it's the other way around.
But
Yeah.
for example, if you follow the history, follow that to the right, for example, and if you go a little bit,
Yes.
no, down there. I mean, it's a
This.
no.
Southeast.
Mogi das Cruzes, né?
Yeah, Mogi das Cruzes.
This.
Exactly. What is that called?
It's this one. The highest reduction.
But I can see exactly the difference from here.
É?
Yeah, there's something lighter.
Não é que você já fez
Exactly
aonde?
around.
Around that, it's lighter.
Yeah.
Acho que isso aí
The
tá
area
fora.
ends here.
No.
Esse cinza geral é fora da Chibana.
Yeah,
A cinza geral você não está pegando.
não.
Ah, tá.
It's the urban area. Yeah. All of this
This
is
is-
not in the sample. You see? Yeah.
Seria muita coincidência em todos eles estarem. There is also a convergence effect.
Convergence. Very.
Did you,
That's the interesting.
in this analysis you didn't put the initial level? It is the, here is the initial level? No. Not in this map, I mean.
Not in this map, but in the regressions we're not
Sure.
sure.
You have to, because it's clearly that the
Yeah.
areas with more info. But it's still a very,
Yeah, that is exactly what Ciro says. Strong convergence. Why? Because the areas that initially had lower rates did not change. They kind of stayed the same. Areas with very high rates experience large increases. So even areas that are very far from the center, as you can see here, reduce the informality rates, for instance, from levels of initially 50% to 25% in 10 years. Whereas these ones had, for instance, 27% and then at the end they had 26%. So no major changes here in the center where the rates were very low, but when the rates were high, the higher the rate, the higher the change. Strong convergence. And that, I don't know, I think is a remarkable result because a priori from all the discourse of segregation, etc., you would expect the opposite, right? That those areas that are far away did not improve as much as the areas that are central. But actually the opposite happened. What is interesting too is that we observe some very significant changes in areas that did not experience an increase in transport access. So even without the transport, they managed to reduce informality rates. So they were not imprisoned and condemned and all of these things. Somehow, we don't know how, somehow these areas managed to experience
Probably it is related with Simplis and May and this kind of things, the government. So if there were like small business, now they have the opportunity to have like a May and they can employ one person, and they had also Simplis, which is like a small bakery in the neighborhood. Now it's formal.
but
Yes.
doesn't explain the difference.
But
Why just in the place where we don't have
because that can happen in the
investment
areas
in
with
transport? It's
Because
happening faster than not.
it's
People
not
who
It was
related.
more
push.
informal.
formal people were pushed.
Exactly. I'm going to show you that exactly. What happens in that is, for instance, in this area of Leicester, which
It's not
has-
that they became
Yes.
formal, it's that
they
they
were
were pushed.
expelled. Exactly. So that's another explanation. For instance, in this Leicester area that is very middle class as far as I understand. I haven't been there myself. Fred hasn't took me there yet. That's our next field trip, Leicester.
Next driver.
Leicester, it's, very heterogeneous.
Thank God
mass.
it's-
Of course.
So,
It's one of the areas where presumably, because 2 million workers were added to the formal labor, to the labor force, 2 million people became formal, then they have higher incomes and they could bid more for places, and they started expanding. So the formal city, like we saw in the model, increased in size, so more area for formal workers. And then what happened to those people there? We don't know. Either they did exactly. Some of them were the ones who benefited from this formalization. Some of them maybe were lucky and ended up in the same informal situation with no money to bid for rent and were expelled to areas even more further away in the different. So as you see areas, the furthermost areas are, when we plot this for 2010, still the periphery, the outer periphery is very informal, right?
For the map, it's a little confused.
The quality.
The
Yes.
rural area and
Yeah.
Ah, yeah, okay, I'm going to change it.
Yeah, I will make it white. But so another thing that would be interesting to do is to separate informal employees, sem carteira, from self-employed. Because
Yeah,
one
but
thing that
it's
may
very little. Self-employed
little.
at like maybe 4%. So it should just,
for these changes,
yeah, it
this is
doesn't
not very.
represent much. The proportion of the labor force that are self-employed is small, and then of those sin carteira as a percentage is very small. We can do it.
The map will be exactly the same.
Yeah, I think so. So here we have now a map which shows the center periphery kind of picture much more clearly. These are local indicators of special associations, so that in an area, what is the probability that your neighbors also have high levels of informality? So these are areas with low level of informality surrounded by areas that also have low levels of informality. Here, clearly the center. All the periphery, here without the urban, right? Clearly areas of informality are surrounded by areas of informality. So here, if you keep your eyes on this one, we're going to see the same map but for the change. Initially there was a cluster of high informality. We're going to see here that it's exactly that area. Now when we consider the changes, here again is the other way around because we're working all on the negatives. So here low means a very high negative, meaning the ones that improve the most. The ones that improve the most is this area. So this is the battlefield where, informal will be in for that space, and clearly the area with major changes. And here, the area that kind of stayed the same, which is the center. So this area was improving very rapidly. This area was kind of put. This is why there is a very clear convergence between these peripheral areas, this one specifically, and the central area. Which is a result in itself that, because I don't know if this has been done before, but we've been trying to find words that kind of explain this convergence phenomenon here, but we haven't found it. So obviously we're going to need to control for this in our regression. Our regression, now we get to the fun part, it's going to look something like this. We're going to use a differences in differences to estimate the effect of changes in transport infrastructure on the informality rate. We're going to have something like this. We have the change in the rate between 2000 and 2010. So keep in mind that most of these values are going to be negative. That complicates most of the values. 95% of the sample, these values are negative because there was an improvement, a huge improvement in informality rate in the period. We're going to have our variable T1 here that is going to be a dummy. We're going to set it to 1 if there was a change in transport access between January of 2000 and January of 2010. So we're not going to be considering, for instance, the new stations of Linea Amarela that opened somewhere in May 2010, etc. So infrastructure that was finished by, say, December 2009 or beginning of 2010. We're going to have some initial controls, such as the initial informal, because without that, we would be just capturing this convergence. We will not be capturing the convergence. Then we're going to have two different samples. In one, we only consider the metro and the municipal bus corridors. In the other one, we're also going to include the train. So that's going to expand our sample also to some of the metropolitan region areas. Yes?
So how do those parameters to your theoretical models.
So according to the first prediction, we would expect that this has a cause and effect on this, meaning that this will reduce the informality rate.
I think his question is if your model probably has
As a
a
mathematical
structural form
Ah,
coming out of the model.
yeah.
yes, it does.
You ignore it in the
Yeah,
report.
you have here a very reduced form
Yes,
approach, and you
yes.
motivate with more structural. Can you recover the structural parameters from this? Can you say something at least about the signal or sign of the or the magnitude of your structural parameters using that?
The reduced form, you cannot go back to your structural model.
Not to identify, but to say something that you can learn something about your structural parameters from this
Yes.
reduced form. Is it
Well,
possible?
we found the equation in that urban search and matching model that the equation of the determinants of the informality rate. This depends on things such as formal job creation, population. The problem is that most of those determinants are all endogenous. So once I try to, of course, they will show up in the one period equation. Once I take first differences, the problem is that would make the endogeneity problem worse because they are related to each other and they're also measured with considerable error. So we tried, but you'll see that some of the controls that we use later here relate to the structural model, but turn out not to be significant. Once we control this initial level of informal, a lot of the controls just, if I include the initial level, for instance, of population or distance to the center, etc., all of that becomes insignificant. So, but yeah, I was trying to actually come up with a reduced form from the model to estimate it this way, but in the end, this endogeneity could be anti-specific, it's hard. So,
You end up in your model of Posadas, you end up with what, 2 or 4 equations to get to the general equilibrium in your model.
where you have the...
You have one for the rent gradient,
Yes.
and then probably have another one for commute.
Yeah.
You end up with these 2. Then you collapse them in this reduced form.
Yeah.
Have you tried to do this link more
Yes,
formally?
but a lot of the...
Because endogeneity will always be a problem here. But, I don't think Sergio was wondering about this. He was wondering how much can you learn from the theoretical model given the empirical parameters that you're estimating.
The main problem with translating the theoretical model to the empirical strategy is that the theoretical model gives predictions for the city as a whole. And here we are tackling local area effects. So we would have to assume, for instance, that each area is a mini city with a CBD and yeah, the same distribution. You know what I mean? So the model, it's better for testing, for instance, across cities, in a sample of cities, then you see how different changes in transport affect different cities, city structure. It's talking about the large overall effect. It doesn't say anything about what happens to local effects. So here we're going to be estimating local effects. So this compatibilizing these citywide predictions with local area, I had big difficulties, so I couldn't find a way to directly translate it without forcing it too much.
Ignoring the structural form and sticking to your reduced form. If you have the variation in informality as your dependent variable, and then you, as one of your independent variables, you have the initial level. I think you have this in levels or in logs. It's the difference of logs, and you control for the log of the initial informality.
It's a rate, so it's not...
Those are just rates.
Yep. Yes, from 0 to 1.
percentile rates. And then you control for the initial percentage rate.
Yes, yes.
So you have, it's a little heterodox difference, but because usually you would put the timing variable and interact them, but that's okay. But I guess you have a convergence model. It's very similar to Barrow,
Yeah.
Sally Martin growth
Yes,
model.
yes.
And I believe in this reduced form, what you're gonna see is how much public transit will impact on the rate of convergence. So
You mean
I'm not
it's an
convinced.
interaction?
I think you probably need an interaction with the initial level, don't you think so?
If you write this in levels,
Yeah, no, the problem is she has the variation of informality on the left side, and then she has the initial level here. So this is a convergence model, better convergence model, pretty much.
and the xi.
In the x, one of the x's is the initial level.
But you can think that's the initial level times a
Times t, right?
times
That's where
the
the
t is
impact
called
will be.
times the trend.
The time is a